I was visiting a friend's brand new apartment in Tokyo recently. A space so minimalist and sleek it felt more like a gallery than a home. But when I went to the kitchen to grab a glass of water, I saw it. Stuck to the side of his high-end stainless steel refrigerator was a chaotic cluster of neon blue and bright red magnets. They were emergency hotlines for plumbers, electrical repairmen, and gas services, some featuring bold text screaming 24 hours okay, and others so sun-faded they looked like relics from a previous decade. When I asked him if he had ever actually called the number on the blue plumbing magnet, he looked at me with genuine confusion. No, he said, I don't even know where it came from. It was just there. To a visitor from, say, Canada or Europe, this looks like a cluttered eyesore junk mail that belongs in the recycling bin. But in Japan, these stickers are treated with a strange, unspoken reverence. They multiply quietly, year after year, colonizing the most prominent appliance in the house. What's fascinating is the psychological shift that happens when you suggest peeling them off. There's this immediate instinctive hesitation. It's a logic that says, it's okay for us to ignore them, but it's not okay to remove them. To an outsider, the fridge looks anxious, like it's bracing for a disaster that never comes. But to the family living there, that visual noise represents a specific kind of domestic order. It raised a question that stuck with me. Why does a culture so famous for its less is more aesthetic insist on turning its refrigerators into these frantic analog command centers? Why does throwing away a plumber's phone number feel to some almost illegal? As it turns out, these tiny, colorful eyesores aren't just about fixing a leaky faucet. They're a physical manifestation of a deep-seated cultural survival instinct that most people don't even realize they have.
It is a phenomenal contradiction, isn't it? It's right at the intersection of aesthetics, technology, and just sheer necessity.
Yeah, exactly.
You have some of the most sophisticated technology on Earth right in the palm of your hand. You know, hyper-efficient apps, robust digital banking, yet the most critical emergency contacts are relegated to a low-tech magnetic piece of plastic stuck right in the center of the kitchen.
Makes no sense on the surface.
It doesn't. And that's what we're doing today. We are diving deep into that specific phenomenon, exploring how this Japanese refrigerator command center serves as a microcosm of a high-trust society. It's a place where these hyper-local service networks and a real culture of disaster preparedness create this very unique sense of domestic security and social order. These objects are a dense archive of cultural priorities.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're going to look at three core insights that explain this magnetic mystery. First, we'll see how these objects are key physical links to a highly effective, hyperlocal disaster preparedness network. Second, we'll reveal how they reflect the ingrained cultural spirit of Mottainai, or anti-waste, which transforms these throwaway items into quietly respected symbols of resourcefulness. And finally, we'll connect this to a unique cultural Galapagos syndrome, a strong preference for physical community visibility over isolating digital methods.
Exactly. When you look at that cluster of magnets, you are actually looking at a complex, centuries-old map of resilience and social capital.
A map. I like that.
It really is. It's a system designed specifically for the moment when the internet and central government help might fail you. In those critical first hours of a major event, it's order disguised as visual chaos.
That brings us straight to the most practical and arguably most critical function of that clutter, the emergency information.
Right.
In a country that experiences, high risk from tsunamis, earthquakes, and typhoons, this analog command center is intrinsically linked to Japan's comprehensive history of community-based risk management.
And what's fascinating here is that the foundation of Japan's resilience strategy isn't built primarily on massive centralized government infrastructure, though of course that exists.
Okay.
It's rooted in what they call self-help, or jisho, and mutual help, which is kyōjō, during a disaster. The philosophy is fundamentally community-driven from the ground up.
So jisho is about individual responsibility, like ensuring your own household is secure, you're stocked with water and non-perishables. You have a plan.
That's it.
And kyōjō is the neighborhood contract, the agreement to look after your neighbors.
Precisely. The logic is, well, it's inescapable. People living in high-risk areas must take direct responsibility in supporting each other because initially they are the only ones there. They're the true first responders.
They're on the scene.
They're on the scene. They have the best, most granular knowledge of their specific area, the hidden flood risks, the traditional evacuation routes, the specific vulnerabilities of their own houses. That local knowledge, that neighborhood-level human capital, often supersedes any national infrastructure when the ground starts shaking or the floodwaters rise.
And this emphasis on local capacity isn't new. It goes back centuries. If you trace the historical timeline of these community-based organizations, or CBOs, you find these deep local roots that predate any modern centralized disaster management agency.
That's absolutely critical context. We can trace formalized community involvement all the way back to the 17th century, specifically with the emergence of the suibodan.
The suibodan, what were they?
These were community-run organizations specifically focused on flood risk management, particularly in low-lying areas. You have to remember, water management was often the most pressing infrastructure concern, so these groups had to organize locally to maintain riverbanks and warning systems.
So these are just regular people, farmers, merchants, organizing themselves.
Yes, exactly. And then came the fire management groups.
Right, in the cities.
In the cities in the 18th century, the suibodan were organized for local firefighting. And again, these weren't salaried municipal employees. These were local people carrying out essential, dangerous, disaster-related activities as community volunteers. They often worked in conjunction with local governments, but relied entirely on neighborhood participation. This is vital. These structures were established, run, and maintained by local residents long before the concepts of, say, professional police or fire services were fully realized.
And that tradition of community self-governance just evolved over time to tackle the modern risks, particularly earthquakes, starting in the 1970s.
That's where we see the rise of jisho. These are neighborhood self-governance groups focused specifically on earthquake preparedness and response.
Okay.
And these groups, they're often integrated into the existing neighborhood associations, the jichikai, and they really are the historical foundations of the sophisticated disaster risk reduction, or DRR, activities we see today. They're formally recognized and supported by authorities, but their strength comes from sustained volunteer participation, neighborhood drills, and a constant accumulation of hyper-local institutional memory.
So understanding the deep heritage helps us understand why the refrigerator, a domestic, local item, becomes so important. It's the fiscal domestic link to this established, centuries-old local network of mutual assistance. And this ties directly into the modern concept of Sekansu Bozai.
Everyday life preparedness, or EP.
Right, everyday life preparedness.
This EP concept is really the ideological backbone of all that magnetic clutter. It shifts the entire DRR approach away from these seasonal, disruptive, large-scale drills. Instead, it focuses on embedding disaster risk reduction thinking and practice into daily routines so that preparedness becomes utterly usual. It's not a panic reaction, it's a reflex. Or, as some researchers call it, it becomes common manners.
Preparedness as manners. That's a striking concept, but I imagine it takes significant cultural pressure to maintain that. I mean, how do you ensure participation isn't just seen as a chore or an unwelcome distraction from daily life?
That brings us to the core strategy for EP implementation, which is brilliantly labeled killing two birds with one stone.
Okay.
It acknowledges a universal human challenge. People are inherently reluctant to attend events solely for disaster risk reduction purposes. They don't want to spend their free Saturday afternoon just drilling for an abstract future tsunami. It's just not fun.
Of course not. So if you can't make people want to drill, you have to combine the necessary DRR element with an enjoyable routine activity. You make the DRR element incidental to the enjoyable activity.
Exactly. You fuse the utility with the pleasure. We discussed the classic example, which is cherry blossom viewing along the riverbanks, the Dote no Hanami.
A huge cultural event.
A massive cultural and social event in the spring.
And the DRR purpose is hidden within the social gathering itself.
Precisely. Cherry trees are frequently planted along riverbanks, or dote. During the winter, the riverbank soil can freeze and weaken, which increases the risk of collapse and flooding when the heavy rainy season arrives in early summer.
I see.
So by inviting the public to gather, walk, picnic, and tread down the riverbank soil during the cherry blossom viewing party, you combine a highly enjoyable social activity with the DRR purpose of physically reinforcing and stabilizing those flood defenses. Most participants are, they're thinking about steak and flowers, but their actions are actively preparing the community for flood season.
That makes the analog magnets on the fridge perfectly logical. It's a micro-level application of killing two birds with one stone.
Go on.
Well, you acquire that magnet because you needed a plumber or an electrician, a critical, immediate domestic maintenance need.
Right.
But that physical vetted magnet now serves a second, unstated purpose, providing an essential, local, vetted contact in a scenario where digital networks might fail completely after a disaster. The maintenance sticker is now a survival asset.
And this feeds directly into another pillar of EP, the locality principle.
The locality principle.
EP dictates that you cannot behave drastically differently in a disaster than you behave in your normal life. Preparedness has to integrate the uniqueness of local knowledge and characteristics. The magnets and stickers represent personalized local contacts relevant only to that specific apartment or that specific neighborhood, which an anonymous national hotline simply cannot replace.
Right. You need to know that plumber or electrician is someone nearby, perhaps someone whose face you might even recognize from a local shop or a community meeting.
That's the trust factor.
So this sounds like a system that is heavily reliant on building and maintaining social capital within a defined physical area.
It is. And the institutionalization of this high-trust, localized network was heavily accelerated after the 1995 Great Henshin-Awaji earthquake in Kobe.
A huge turning point.
A profound learning experience. That event demonstrated that local residents, not formal state-level first responders, were responsible for the vast majority of initial rescue operations. They were pulling their neighbors from the rubble in those first critical hours.
Following that, Kobe City focused intensely on formalizing and supporting these voluntary organizations for DRR, which led to the development of the Bokomi model.
Bokomi, which is short for disaster-safe welfare communities. It's a landmark integrated approach.
What does integrated mean in this context?
It addresses the inherent challenge of volunteer fatigue. It does this by combining two distinct functional areas that are both essential for community health. You have the disaster risk reduction activities like drills, and you have essential welfare activities like friendship visits, particularly to elderly or vulnerable residents.
How does that integration overcome the challenges of fragmentation? Because, different community groups often operate in silos. The youth group, the senior center, the local business association, they don't always talk to each other.
Well, Bokomi's genius is its integrated structure, which is often centered around the elementary school district, a natural existing social hub.
Oh, that's smart.
It successfully integrated all those disparate local groups. The residents associations, elderly associations, women's associations, youth associations, the volunteer fire corps, and local business entities. By melding DRR activities like earthquake drills and evacuation planning with routine welfare maintenance like checking on seniors or running local events, they ensure the network remains active and robust even during long periods between disasters.
So it's not a one-off thing.
Exactly. It transforms the disaster preparation task from a one-off panic event into an ongoing social responsibility.
So it's essentially a local school district-based social club where the disaster drill is simply baked into the routine social interaction. And we have concrete evidence that this level of local trust literally saves lives.
Absolutely. The case study from the Great East Japan earthquake in 2011 is often cited. Take Wakabayashi Ward in Sendai City.
Okay.
The local community there had a strong pre-existing relationship with the Arahama Elementary School, where they regularly held these EP education sessions. When the massive tsunami warning was issued, the community used their local knowledge, they trusted this network, and they decided that it would take too long to evacuate to the originally designated distant official school.
So they made their own call.
They pivoted. They relied on their mutual informed decision-making, and they took shelter in Arahama Elementary School, which they knew was a robust local center.
And the result?
About 320 people were saved there, precisely because the community was tied to that integrated, trusted, and localized Bokomi-style network. They made a critical, life-saving decision based on social capital and hyper-local knowledge that transcended the general public announcement.
Wow. So when we look back at those neon magnets sitting on your refrigerator, they are not just commercial advertising. They're a domestic link to this centuries-old, highly effective, institutionalized network of mutual assistance.
Mm-hmm.
They are placed there by a trusted local business that is implicitly part of that community resilient structure. That's why you hesitate to throw them away. You're not throwing away junk mail. You're tearing down a piece of your invisible, highly effective social safety net.
You are dismantling a physical manifestation of high-trust, hyper-local social capital, and that hesitation is entirely rational within that cultural framework. It is the visible sign of your commitment to kyōjō.
That brings us to the psychological and cultural reason for preserving this clutter. The hesitation to discard the magnet persists, even if the service number is outdated. The business is closed. or the phone number is just forgotten.
Yeah.
It's not just about disaster contacts. It's about a deeply rooted spiritual concept.
This is where we transition from the functional utility of the magnet to its philosophical weight, which is captured entirely in the profound concept of Mottainai.
Mottainai.
It's a cultural value that goes far deeper than modern Western ideas of recycling. It encompasses significant spiritual and ethical dimensions regarding waste and respect.
When we talk about sustainability in the West, we often frame it in terms of, economic cost or environmental efficiency. How does Mottainai introduce a spiritual or ethical layer to that?
Well, we need to break the word down to understand its depth. Mottainai refers to the intrinsic dignity, the essence, or the fundamental value of a being or an object.
Okay, the inherent worth.
The inherent worth. And nai simply means the lack of something. Therefore, Mottainai literally expresses regret or sorrow when the full value or intrinsic dignity of an object is not realized through its proper use.
So it's not just a regret over wasted material. It's a regret over wasted potential, the disrespect shown to the object's inherent essence.
Exactly. And this concept intertwines principles from the two primary religions in Japan, Buddhism and Shintoism.
How so?
In Buddhism, there is the fundamental precept of the connection between all things, both animate and inanimate. When we waste something, it's seen as actively breaking this fundamental interconnectedness. The wastefulness disrupts the natural order of things.
I see.
And then Shintoism adds the element of kami, the spirits or sacred essences that may reside in any given object, from a tree to a rock or even a tool.
So wasting something.
Wasting something or discarding it before its useful life is complete offends the kami within that thing.
That transforms the act of throwing something away from just a logistical chore into a moral failure.
It does. It dictates a form of material humility. Therefore, the persistence of the magnet, even if it's unused, is a small daily acknowledgement of its potential utility and its inherent value, its motai. It's a daily act of showing respect by avoiding waste, acknowledging the object's intrinsic dignity as a resource that could be needed.
That is a powerful contrast to the modern Western model of mass consumption and disposal, where objects are designed to be disposable and often treated with immediate contempt once their initial use is over.
The difference is stark. The core Japanese trait is to try to use something for its entire effective life, or to repair it meticulously, seeing disposal as the absolute last resort. This is the culture where you are taught from childhood that it is rude to waste even a single grain of rice in your bowl. This ethos attempts to find new uses or new homes for possessions they no longer need, rather than sending them immediately to a landfill.
To appreciate just how radical this anti-waste ethic is, we really have to look at what it stands in opposition to the modern consumer engine. The statistics on the modern linear economy are genuinely shocking, especially when you contrast them with the principles of Mottainai.
Oh, absolutely. Consider the fashion industry. The concept of fast fashion is the very antithesis of respecting an object's motai.
Right.
This industry produces over 100 billion garments each year globally, but estimates suggest that 92 million tons of that ends up in landfills annually.
92 million tons.
That's the equivalent of a rubbish truck full of clothes ending up on a landfill site every single second.
That's staggering. And the cycle is accelerating.
It is. The production level has doubled in the last 2 decades, yet the number of times an article of clothing is worn before it's discarded has fallen by 35% in the past 15 years. This rapid obsolescence and massive environmental impact are precisely what Mottainai exists as a philosophical and cultural defense against. That magnet on the fridge is a quiet protest against the hyper-disposable nature of late capitalism.
And the historical examples show how deeply embedded this resourcefulness was. The life cycle of a kimono, for example, illustrates a true circular economy in action.
A single kimono would potentially have many, many lives over decades. It would start as a fine outer robe, then be professionally cut down and repurposed for a child's clothing.
Okay.
After that, it might become a household cleaning cloth, maybe a table covering, and finally, its remaining cotton fibers could be used as a diaper material. The most cherished fabrics might even be given to a temple to be reused as a religious banner or an altar cloth.
Wow.
It goes through a complete respected cycle where nothing is truly discarded until every last thread is rendered useless.
This cultural defense against waste wasn't accidental or just convenient. It was deliberately fostered during a time of self-imposed isolation.
Exactly. We link Mottainai to the concept of sustainability established during the Edo period, from 1603 to 1868, under the policy of national seclusion, or sakoku.
So because external resources were limited, you couldn't just import materials when you ran out. The people had to practice extreme institutionalized resourcefulness.
They had no choice. And this was reinforced by a specific philosophical principle of contentment.
Right.
The philosophical underpinning was taru wo shiru, which means learning to be content. This was promoted heavily by Buddhist teachings and thinkers influenced by ancient texts like the Tao Te Ching. It's a radical idea, seeking contentment with what one has, rather than pursuing endless desire, comfort, and consumption.
So rather than seeing contentment as a passive state, it was an active philosophical tool for resource management.
Absolutely. The idea promoted was that those who know they have enough are truly wealthy. It provided a spiritual rationale for not demanding more than was necessary. There's no greater disaster, philosophically speaking, than chronic discontent. This concept provided the behavioral enforcement necessary for the material culture of sustainability to thrive.
And the material culture of Edo, Japan reflected this philosophical value through these pervasive recycling systems that make modern city recycling look rudimentary. They're essentially a zero-waste society.
It was an incredible, highly specialized circular economy. It wasn't just about general secondhand goods. They had specialized repair trades for virtually everything.
For everything.
Everything. You had the koyashiya, or night soil collectors, who were critical to the agricultural cycle. You had tradesmen specializing in resharpening worn knives, repairers for locks, and even specialists in changing the hoops of wooden bathtubs. Even broken porcelain could be repaired with gold lacquer kintsugi, which highlights the break as a point of history and beauty, not a flaw.
They truly specialized down to the finest detail.
Indeed. You had people specializing in repairing worn paper or buying discarded paper to recycle it. They repaired broken abacuses, reattached handles to cooking pots, and bought worn-out barrels to fix them up. Everything was used right until the very end of its effective life.
And the evidence suggests that this resulted in remarkably little actual garbage.
Extremely little. Most of what was categorized as waste was agricultural sludge, fragments of earthenware after a fire, or maybe surplus soil from construction. The thorough recycling meant the streets of Edo were famously clean. The complete natural circulation mechanism where waste from the mass consumption society of Edo fed the farms, which then sold their produce back to the city, demonstrates a foundational economic principle built on Mottainai.
That perfectly illustrates how Mottainai isn't just a quaint phrase. It's a foundational, functional, economic, and spiritual principle.
And that's the true story of the magnet on the page. It is spared removal because even if it is ignored for daily convenience, it retains its utility and potential value, its matai. Discarding it would violate this fundamental, deep-seated cultural principle of non-waste. It transforms a mundane utility sticker into a quiet symbol of cultural defense against the endless stream of disposable materials the modern world insists upon.
Our final puzzle piece examines the technology paradox. Why, in a technological leader like Japan, a country that gave the world high-speed rail, advanced robotics, hyper-efficient manufacturing, why is this critical emergency and service information intentionally maintained in a chaotic, physical, low-tech format right on the refrigerator door? It seems like a deliberate, deep-seated resistance to digitization.
It is a deliberate choice, and to understand it as a socio-technical phenomenon, we introduce the concept of the Galapagos syndrome, or Garapagosuka.
I know this term usually refers to how Japanese tech evolved in isolation, leading to these brilliant domestic products that just fail internationally.
That's the classic definition. It's an analogy drawn from Darwin's studies, where local species evolved unique traits due to isolation, making them incompatible with the wider world. In a business context, it means systems evolve for the intense demands of the local market, acquiring features that make them incompatible with global standards.
We mentioned the classic examples earlier, the overly complex 3G phones and the highly regulated Kai cars.
Right. And financial technology shows the syndromes strongly. Think about the historical challenges travelers faced. Many of the roughly 190,000 APMs across Japan traditionally did not accept bank and credit cards issued outside of the country. Now, this is slowly changing, but for decades.
Right. The financial infrastructure was optimized purely for the local user and local institutions.
Exactly. Now, when you apply this Galapagos syndrome, not just to consumer electronics, but to administrative and domestic information systems, you see why the fridge magnets persist. Japan maintains a strong, persistent preference for physical, analog processes over perceived, efficient digital ones.
This is a famous point of cultural friction for foreign residents, isn't it? The reliance on physical forms, cash transactions, and, most famously, the fax machine in the 21st century.
Oh, the fax machine.
Even utility bills often come in a physical envelope that requires you to take it to a convenience store for physical payment, confirming the transaction with a stamp or seal, even when direct debit or online payment options exist.
Right. The infrastructure is there, but the habit isn't.
Why does this analog inertia persist, especially in government and administrative contexts? It's not simply a lack of technical capacity.
No, it's a convergence of factors. The older population demographics certainly play a role, as many elderly citizens are simply not comfortable with digital systems. But the cultural demand for perfection is huge.
What do you mean?
Any new digital service must be seen as absolutely faultless upon release, which leads to rigorous, redundant testing and a very slow pace of digitization. Furthermore, the reliance on physical procedures is tied to the concept of henko.
The henko, the official personal seal or stamp.
Yeah.
Used instead of a signature, correct?
Exactly. The henko represents legal authority and verified identity. While digital signatures are becoming more common, historically, legal documents and formal approvals required the physical impression of the henko. This requirement creates deep friction when you try to digitize processes, as it often necessitates a physical, in-person verification loop. This inefficiency, incidentally, supports an entire industry of administrative jobs.
So the resistance to change isn't purely technological. It's cultural inertia reinforced by legal and identity verification norms. And I think this analog preference serves a critical social and security function, especially in the context of high trust and disaster preparedness that we discussed earlier.
This is where it gets really interesting. The resistance to digital isolation links directly to a preference for visible, physical verification, which reinforces trust within the society without resorting to aggressive, invasive systems.
We see that preference for visible trust in everyday retail transactions, right?
Absolutely. Think about the small, often brightly colored piece of tape that gets placed on purchased items at the cash register.
Right.
This is done especially for single items or large items, or if you purchase something from an unintegrated internal section of a store, like a pharmacy within a larger supermarket. This low-tech physical tape visibly shows the item is paid for.
In other high-consumption countries, that verification usually requires electronic sensors, bag checks, or aggressive digital surveillance at the doors.
But the tape and the magnet are two sides of the same coin. They are physical, visible tokens of verified trust. They prioritize visible accountability and simple physical evidence, avoiding the need for high-tech, expensive, and invasive surveillance protocols. The tape confirms payment and eliminates ambiguity without resorting to security guards or electronic gates.
So, applying this back to our refrigerator, the magnets provide highly visible, immediately accessible information verified by the physical presence of the sticker itself.
Right.
In contrast, digital-first systems saving numbers on a phone, relying on the cloud, or even a centralized app, are isolated and rely entirely on power and infrastructure that we know might fail completely during a major disaster.
The analog choice here is a functional response to the unique risks of the environment. The physical system is resilient because it requires no power, no network connectivity, and minimal literacy to use. The data is localized to the kitchen. The decision to keep critical emergency and service information analog and visible on the fridge is a deliberate cultural choice rooted in the lessons of high-risk living.
And crucially, this ties into the social nexus. Japanese culture traditionally places heavy importance on social ties, the intuitive understanding within the community, and the collective welfare, often prioritizing that over the purely isolated individual experience.
That's the key social connection. The physical presence of those local service magnets placed there by trusted service providers prioritizes this visible, localized social nexus. It's an artifact of the community. In a disaster scenario, your phone might be dead, your battery's spent, the network tower's down, but those magnets, those bright, colorful bits of clutter are still there. They are a tangible link to a local community lifeline, ready to fulfill the kyōjō promise.
It's the ultimate expression of favoring a dependable physical community artifact, a piece of paper or plastic, over an isolating, failure-prone digital approach. The clutter is resilience. It is a system evolved locally, Galapagos style, to meet unique local needs for survival and social cohesion, needs that the global digital world simply doesn't address as effectively in those extreme moments of failure. What a remarkable shift in perspective. We started by looking at a cluttered appliance and realized it's a living cultural document, a technological and spiritual barometer of an entire society.
It truly is. That refrigerator, initially seen as an arbitrary mess, actually serves as a decentralized analog survival network, offering immediate access to vital local services. It's a network woven into a dense tapestry of community-based risk management, relying on centuries of inherited local knowledge and trusted neighborhood ties, institutionalized in models like Bakomi.
And beneath the practicality, we found the profound philosophical root. The persistence of the magnets honors centuries of anti-waste philosophy, the spirit of Mottainai. By refusing to discard the magnet, even when its service is not immediately required, the household acknowledges the object's intrinsic dignity and utility, serving as a quiet cultural defense against the relentless pressure of modern disposable consumer habits.
And finally, that analog persistence is a manifestation of the Galapagos syndrome, applied not just to electronics, but to social infrastructure and information management. It represents a deliberate choice to rely on dependable, physical, local community structures over the globalizing, often isolating digital world, favoring highly visible trust over electronic surveillance.
The seemingly anxious refrigerator, bracing for disaster, is in fact the ultimate symbol of domestic resilience and social order. Its colorful clutter is a visible map of deep social trust and meticulous preparedness, built to endure both time and disaster by prioritizing the physical community over the ephemeral digital connection.